Okay, real quickly, I want to talk about, you practice some of this stuff. You've learned about the determinants of elasticity or inelasticity, and I want to give you just some practical sort of like, how does this show up in life and why is this important to know? Because you should always wonder why these things are important or why you should know this. So you've learned a basic of what elasticity means. You've learned the determinants of it. So one thing is, and we know that it's about issues of necessity, substitutes, percent of income. So if you're a firm, let's say that you're a firm, and let's say that you're producing, something that no one really cares about, right? You ever been in line at Old Navy and there's all that crap near the register and they're all crap, but essentially they're just there at the eye level of a child, so the child will bug the parent to buy it, but it's crap, right? Well, all of those things are really cheap, and the reason why is because if the price went up at all, right? So we start off here as the price, and then here's the quantity. But if the price goes up a little bit, if they're expensive, you're not going to buy any of it, right? You're not going to buy any of it because it's crap. You don't need it. But if they lower the price, which they do, and they make it super duper cheap, then all of a sudden you're going to buy more of it. It's not necessary, but it's something that's there. Your kids want it, so it's cheap. You'll buy it, right? That's the reason why they have all that crap there and why it's so cheap. Is because they know it's not necessary. We have to keep the price low because there's an elastic demand curve for it, right? There are other things that have a super inelastic demand curve. Gas, actually, for most people, particularly people in rural areas, because we tend to drive further to work. I know in my class, the great majority of people, there are people who work in Anderson County, but the great majority of people will drive to Frankfort or drive to Lexington. And that's a lot of gas. And so gas, you got to get there, right? So gas becomes inelastic. So if the price of gas goes up a little bit, we're going to continue to keep buying. Maybe not as much as we had before, right? But we're going to keep buying. I mean, it's a pretty small change. One of the reasons why gas can be really high in price is that there's an inelastic demand curve for it, right? For medicines, pharmaceutical companies know that there are certain medicines people really need, and certain pharmaceutical companies, particularly if they're kind of evil, will continue to raise the prices of drugs because they can, because people need to have it, right? It's a necessity. It's also, for some of them, because of patents, there are very few substitutes, so you kind of have to have that, right? There are all kind of really funny examples I can give you, although I shouldn't give them to you on a video because of who watches. But there are really certain videos that are certain. There are certain behaviors we put up with. I'll give you one funny one you probably see all the time. You ever wonder why real good-looking people get away with lots of crap in relationships? There's a real reason for it. There aren't that many substitutes of them, right? There's plenty of people out there who aren't as impressive, and there are lots of substitutes, so they have to behave a certain way. Athletes and entertainers can behave different ways because there's so few of them out there. We put up with their behavior because they're in rare supply, right? The same thing with as a coach, coaches will put up with the behavior of certain athletes that are a lot because they don't have a lot of other people that are as good. I know when I was coaching that happened a couple times. And so that's a sort of a real world. It's not even really about consuming, but it's just a real world example of when there are fewer substitutes, we put up with more. And by put up with more in economics, we're talking about price, right? We're giving up more for it. So, I went and watched some, my daughter goes to Alabama, and Alabama football is amazing, right? And you wonder, they have all these running backs and they have all these linebackers, and they're so amazing. And one of the reasons that makes them so amazing, they have to work so hard because they recruit so well. There are people behind them because they're basically substitutable. So they are really pressured to do really well. And so again, it's another example sort of what we see all over the place. The more substitutes there are for something, then you're going to have to keep your price low, or people will just go choose something else. They'll go choose someone else. If I'm a super insanely wealthy person everything for me. If I'm a billionaire, basically everything becomes completely inelastic, right? Because everything will be a small percent of my income. If I go buy shorts or jeans or a car, none of that really. If I'm a billionaire, the difference between $100 pair of jeans, a $50 pair of jeans, or a $10,000 car, or a $50,000 car, a billionaire, there is no real percent difference. As ridiculous as that sounds, if you're Jeff Bezos and you're super wealthy, if you're worth $100 billion, the percent difference between $100 something or a $50,000 something is almost insignificant. And because of that, his demand curve for almost all goods and services is completely inelastic. He has to spend a lot of money to actually have to feel that much money leaving his pocket, right? So those are reasons why the percent of income substitutes necessity. These are reasons why people behave the way they do, and it's reflected in the slope of our demand curves. And we need to know this because it's telling us why we are the way that we are, right? And businesses use this. If you're a firm and you're selling a good that has an inelastic demand curve, then you would be smart to raise your price. Now, sometimes that also might mean you're a jerk, but if you want to make more money, you can raise your price. If you are a firm and you're selling something where everybody's the same, then you're going to have to distinguish yourself somehow by having better service or probably having lower prices, right? We see this if you're in lawn care, right? If you're in lawn care, and you're charging $50 a yard, and everybody's charging $50 a yard, all of a sudden, if you start charging $75 a yard, and everybody's pretty much the same as you, no one's going to call you, right? Because it's an elastic demand for cutters. There's so many substitutes out there that there is some pressure to keep your price low, all right? So these are all kind of examples of why we need to learn about elasticity. It gets particularly important when we start talking about different markets, like perfectly competitive markets or monopolies. Those goods and services have a differently sloped demand curve because of any number of these reasons. Traditionally, it's just because of the number of substitutes, right? So all of those things are important to how we behave.